Hey, good morning. Thank you for coming here. My name is David McCaleb. I'm Vice President of Marketing here at Bankers Insurance. Just wanted to say welcome for all the clients that are on. And if you're not a client, that's fantastic. We welcome you and hope that you find this helpful. And as we talk on a subject that's actually really pertinent to our businesses as we're all looking at going back to business. I'm actually back in the office today. One of the few ones that are back. I know a lot of you guys are still remote, and really looking forward to our conversation this morning. Two items of housekeeping. The webinar will be recorded, and so we can share that link out, and it will be shared out to you guys, to all the attendees once it's over. And there will be a Q&A at the end of the webinar. There will be a time for question and answer. So by all means, go ahead and note the questions as you go through, and just we'll address those at the very end. So I'd like to now introduce Jamie Hasty of SESCO Management Consultants.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, David. It's a pleasure to be here with you all this morning. My name is Jamie Hasty. I'm Vice President with a firm called SESCO Management Consultants. SESCO is actually the oldest HR consulting firm in the country. We've been in business since 1945. We've got clients in all industries throughout the entire country, small all the way up to Fortune 500. And our primary focus is employment law compliance, training and development, policy procedure, DOL, support in the event of investigations, affirmative action programs, executive screening. I'm exhausted just talking about everything that we do, but it really is a pleasure to be here with you this morning. SESCO has a great partnership with bankers for probably the last 6, almost 7 years. So it's a nice opportunity for us to get together and chat about some really, really pertinent things that are going on in society and the workplace environment today. So our game plan is we are going to kind of touch through how do we nurture our organization's culture. And I've broken down some points that I will go more in depth with you all through that. I will show my screen here in just a minute, so you don't have to see my lovely elephant in the background. But a couple of things. There is a chat feature in the right-hand bottom corner of your taskbar. So feel free to use that as we go along. Type your questions. I will be fielding those at the very end. You all should also be muted. If you are not on mute, please do that now. Also, if for some reason you accidentally come off on mute and you put us on hold, likely we will hear your background music. So please don't do that as well. Make sure that you're muted. Use the chat feature, and so we will get through hopefully all of your questions. We've got about roughly 45 minutes of content, give or take, and then we will go through questions. And then I will also talk a little bit about the SESCO Bankers relationship. And if you're a client, what you may or may not have access to and how you can get access if you're not currently able to chat with SESCO for some HR-related support. So with that being said, I'm going to show my screen. Let's see here. And I'm going to pull up our slideshow. Perfect. So when we talk about nurturing our business, you know, we're 5 months into this COVID pandemic, and we've gone through a lot as employers, right? You've had legal changes, you've had complete disruption to your business operations. Perhaps you were closed for a while, and now you're starting to reopen. We've got different phases that are coming and being pushed from the various states. And so we may have clients in Virginia, North Carolina, East Tennessee, West Virginia that may be joining us, and your respective states are doing different things at the moment. So, you know, there's a lot going on top of trying to run a business, but also run your personal life. And so as we continue to go through these phases and reopen, it's really, really important that as business owners, as leaders, as managers, that we are kind of focusing on getting back to the core of the business, and that really relies on the culture. So we're going to talk about that and break out some particular aspects. And the first one really is employee engagement. When we talk to clients throughout the entire country, we're hearing various things about, well, my employees are frustrated, or my employees are not communicating well, or I'm not sure how to communicate with my staff because they're all working remotely now, or they've been off because we temporarily furloughed and now I have to recall them and I'm not sure whether they're interested in coming back. And if they do, are they going to be fully engaged in doing the job? And those are all really valid conversations and questions to be asking. So when we talk about employee engagement, it really, for some, has kind of been pushed to the side because we've been focusing on so many other important aspects during this COVID piece. And so it's really, really important that we keep up with our initiative and making sure that our employees are not only staying productive when they're at work, but a lot of that comes from being healthy, having good relationships with their team members and their leaders, and leadership really demonstrating good empathy and understanding. And that empathy, that understanding, that engagement really is driven by communication. And I'll kind of touch a little bit more on that after. But when I look at how we are adjusting our business plans, our day-to-day operations, we've got to have engaged employees to make it through. You all are in various industries. You all have different client bases, different services that you're offering. And so it's going to look different for your organization than it may look for somebody in a competing organization, but also in a different industry. So as I mentioned, a lot of our employees, just as you are as business owners, are going through a variety of feelings: uncertainty, isolation. Maybe they don't feel like they're in the know like they used to be. And so when we have disengaged employees, it makes it harder to motivate. When we talk about motivation and morale, a lot of times people make those synonymous, and that's not the case. You can have motivated staff, but morale can be low, and vice versa. So we want to work hard, make sure that they're invested in our culture, our values, and we'll hit on that too, because we've invested time and money into these employees, and we need to get our return on investment. Plus, we need to be able to meet the needs of the business. So when employees often feel like they have a sense of belonging, they're contributing to something meaningful. And so when we look at that and kind of getting back to the core values, I call it the line of sight. And the line of sight is really drilling back down to the basics. Why does the organization exist? And this is a good way to kind of re-engage your employees. And that's a demonstrated commitment to the culture of your leadership as well. But take it back to basics for them. All too often we operate in kind of our silos or within our departments, and that's very natural. It happens in every organization. But we often forget, what is the overall purpose of the organization? Yes, to provide X service. Yes, to do, the obvious things. But what are the non-obvious things that are core values of the organization? Perhaps it's philanthropy. Perhaps it is about community and workforce development. And you guys are really involved in that. So remember to take it back to the line of sight of the organization. Why do we exist? Why is that important? More importantly, what is that particular employee's role in the line of sight? When we think about working in silos, we have natural silos now because we've got work from home arrangements. We have perhaps rotating schedules where employees are not interacting as much face-to-face or in person as they would with the entire staff because we're staggering schedules. So thinking about really how their job, their duties, lack thereof of doing the duties really kind of impacts other departments, other divisions, other organizations, or other employees within the organization, and what that line of sight is. Here's the train's leaving at 5 p.m. Where are we headed and how quickly are we headed? The line of sight is really, really important when you try to work on employee engagement. Employees have had a lot on their minds lately, just as you may have as well, personally and professionally. And so their focus may not always be on the workplace. And we want to try to not beat that dead horse with a stick, but you want to make it part of the everyday dialogue of always kind of bringing it back to, here's why we exist, here's what we need to do. So the other piece about employee engagement is you really need to be transparent and realistic. Everybody is in a different place right now. I heard a great saying a while ago when the pandemic first hit, and it was a professional that we were chatting with, and somebody made the comment of, oh, well, we're all in the same boat, we'll get through it together. And this very wise individual said, no, I don't think we're necessarily in the same boat. We are maybe in the same lake, in the same river, but our boats all look different. And so I think that's really important to remember and to reiterate to your employees is that, look, we all have a lot going on. We have to be transparent and realistic because we're all going through slightly different things. So when we're being transparent and realistic, you want to keep people in the loop. You want to make sure that we're effectively driving that engagement. So the more that we can be transparent in what's going on, what policies are being put in place, what schedules we've made adjustments to, that makes them feel in the know, but it also helps reduce employees creating their own dialogue, right? So when we're not sharing information, when we're not keeping employees in the know, to a certain degree, if it's going to impact their job or their ability to perform their job, that needs to be part of the communication. A lot of times if they feel as if they're being kept in the dark, whether that's a perception or a reality, that allows for distrust to kind of root among your workforce, and we don't want that. So bring them in, give them frequent updates. If they don't know exactly what's going on, they can't support you all as business owners, as leaders. So there was a recent study that only half of employees indicated that their organization gave regular updates as, we're in phase 2, this is what's going on, this is what it's going to look like. So make sure that you're engaging with them and giving them clear channels of communication that are working, whether that's weekly Zooms, daily touch points, updates to newsletters. There may be an internal HRIS or communication system that you're using. So make sure that you're capitalizing on that. Again, focus on your core values. This is really important as we continue to navigate this pandemic and this crisis. They should be the heart of your organization, why you exist. Yes, employees need to have a paycheck and benefits to support their basic life needs, like housing and paying bills and feeling safe and secure and, having a job. But a lot of times those core values often have attracted those employees to your organization. If you're not already aware, the number one reason why employees leave an organization is not because they found more money elsewhere or better benefits. Those can be reasons, but the number one reason employees leave the organization is because they leave their manager. And so that tells us that relationships are so important to staff. If you don't have a connection or a relationship with your employees, they are going to be less likely to commit to you and the business and the organization, and they're less likely to stay. And you all are very well aware of how much time and money goes into screening and hiring and onboarding. So you want to make sure that we're focusing on our core values, we're demonstrating those core values in normal day-to-day, pre-COVID, but even post-COVID, it is that much more important. You also need to make room for continuous feedback. And that goes both ways, both with us giving feedback to the employees on what's working, what's not working, but also be open to receiving feedback from your staff. A lot of times I find that some leaders find difficulty in receiving feedback on themselves from their staff. And I get it, it's scary. Nobody wants to hear potential things that, you could be doing better. But we all have things that we can be doing better. So employees need to receive that constructive feedback. Again, going back to weekly touch points with your teams, your departments, or even with each individual. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes. It could be 10 minutes. What's working for you this week? What were your highs? What were your lows? How can I help you do your job to the best of your ability? And this, again, goes to foster that relationship, which drives employee engagement. They need to feel like they're supported and that the feedback is a two-way street, that they're not going to get their hands slapped by providing feedback, even if it's something that we don't want to hear. The annual evaluations and ongoing performance feedback and evaluations are still important in the current climate. You just may have to find different ways of hosting those evaluations. It may have to be virtual. So don't push those off because employees need that feedback. Also, if you're doing annual opinion surveys or satisfaction surveys, that's great. I strongly encourage that, but don't just rely solely on that data. You have to have that open dialogue. Ask them questions as to, how are you feeling? How is the job going? What are the struggles? Do you have enough tools, or do you feel like you have the right tools and capabilities from a technological standpoint to be successful in your job? There's a lot of changes that have happened for us. And so, we can talk about generations every day, but you may have some employees that are struggling with the change in the work environment and maybe working from home or not being comfortable with the technology. And you're going to have other groups of employees that can take it and run with it and be just as productive. So you're going to want to look at that piece too. Another great way to drive employee engagement is to remember to celebrate the victories. Ongoing constructive feedback, reinforcing the good, but addressing the not so good behaviors is really, really important right now. Celebrating the small victories and recognizing your employees is crucial. I'm a huge proponent, and from an HR organizational development, we really always try to recommend, if you don't have one, look for an employee recognition program. It doesn't have to be something physical where you're giving them gifts or bringing in lunch or doing those sorts of things. But the recognition is really, really important when you look at your culture. When we do a lot of statistically significant employee opinion surveys, one area that often comes out of the results for many organizations is that employees don't feel recognized. And some employees, based on their personality profile, are going to want grand gestures because they love that external recognition with their peers and that sort of thing. And others need more quiet recognition because big glitzy blasts, email blasts to their employer group rather, that oh, Jamie did so great, blah, 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 that might make them uncomfortable. So, find a way to implement, if you don't already have one, an employee recognition program. And perhaps that's a good way to have your employees create or provide input on what type of recognition program would you all like to see? What do you think is fair and would bring value and show you appreciation for the good work that you all are doing? Again, it doesn't always have to be monetary. A simple thank you goes a very, very long way. Again, have the right tools in place. They need the right training. They need the right technology. They need the right support from leadership to make sure that they can get their job done. And if you have a lot of folks that are working remotely right now, make sure that it's a collaboration between you as the leader and the staff. You may also want to have some cloud-based collaborative apps like Google Docs or Google Sheets or Trello, where employees can kind of connect with each other. I know Zoom has kind of become Zoom, Google Teams, or Microsoft Teams, Google Chats, all of that has kind of become the norm, which is awesome. But then also recognize that some people are starting to get burnt out a little bit on the video stuff, so find a nice balance there. You want to also enable that teamwork and collaboration. That's huge for an employee engagement. Making sure that we have regular team check-ins or department check-ins. They can bring their daily stand-ups to whatever that structured check-in looks like. And also recognize that, working from home doesn't also work for everybody. Some people thrive in that and other people really struggle. Perhaps they've got their spouse, kids, and animals all at home, and they find it incredibly distracting and frustrating, and they can't get things done. So, everybody has their own preferred working, but also learning environment. And so you may have to make slight adjustments or provide additional support or grace to employees that are struggling with that work from home. Yes, again, we still have a business to run, but being in uncharted territories, we're kind of forced into this situation of having to have a little bit more patience and having to show a little bit more grace and empathy if things aren't 100% hitting the mark. Focus on everyday experiences. Understand that our employees are doing the best that they can, just like you're doing the best that you can. And they're putting considerable effort into trying to maintain that work-life balance. We're hitting the summer months, so people might start traveling, which gives them a little bit of a break from work to kind of have maybe a change of scenery if they've been stuck in the house for the last 4 months. And so, we've got to do what we can to reduce our employees' stress level, but boost that confidence with their engagement. Good positive recognition, good constructive feedback, focusing on facts versus attitudes and opinions. You're never going to win in an employee coaching, counseling, discipline situation if you're focusing on attitude and opinion versus the facts or the behaviors of why the performance is not hitting the mark. Don't forget, too, that we need to try to be inclusive. Whether it's COVID or everything else that's going on in the world today, we want to make sure that we're being as inclusive with our staff as possible. That if we're doing, a virtual social with our team, that everybody's included. Or at least invited. You may have conversations that are going on amongst employees right now that are tied to some of the more social issues that we're seeing in the media and in your respective communities right now. And those are really, really tough conversations to have. You don't want to squash it, but you also want to make sure that it's respectful, it's appropriate, and that we're being inclusive of everybody's opinions, ideas, and where they fall on that piece. You also want to demonstrate that we're a good company. Do right by your employees. You've got to be careful about demonstrating social and corporate responsibilities, which is important. And a lot of employees are now looking for where their their organization stands on certain social issues. And that can drive employee engagement. If they don't feel like they can connect with your core values and your social and corporate responsibilities, then they're likely not going to be engaged. That's not to say that every employee has to think and feel the way that we as business owners, we as managers feel. That's not what I'm saying. But company reputation and how we treat our employees and how we engage with our employees is really important. It always has been important, but it is that much more important given COVID and everything else that's going on today. So the other thing is, thinking about our communications. What's working, what's not working? I mentioned earlier transparent and frequent communication. Sending emails or sending, updates in a company newsletter. Remember that because we're doing a lot more electronically, that employees are getting bombarded with email communication. So, think about what is it that we need to communicate to them and what's going to be the best way to get that message across. It may not be email, it may be a call, it may be face-to-face. Anticipate needs. You want to make sure that we're thinking ahead. So we're getting ready. If you're here in Virginia, we're getting ready to roll into phase 3. And not a whole lot changes with phase 3, but anticipate what is that going to look like for our employees. Does that change the fact that people can be more in the office? And I'll talk more about some of the legal stuff in the next slide because there are some things coming down the pipeline, particularly here in Virginia. But overall, employee engagement is tough even without COVID. Without this pandemic, employee engagement is difficult. But we want to try to focus on the culture, make sure that our leadership is also walking the walk and talking the talk, that we're not engaged in, negative comments about changes or policies or other employees or other managers. Those sorts of things can really crush the culture and show employees that they can't trust you or that they can't commit to you. Show your gratitude. Make sure that we're trying to be as productive as we can, which is why, that job description, SMART goals, all of those performance metrics are really, really important as well. But you know what? Have open and honest communications with your staff. Whether it's, here's the change that we're thinking about, we're not really sure if it's going to work, and we're going to try it anyway, and we need your feedback on things that went well and things that didn't. That's okay too. So, focus on the culture, looking at our purpose, our values, how we lead our staff, asking our managers to really model the right behaviors, and that really comes from the top down. The business owner has to drive that culture, and how we are managing our talent. That's really, really important as well. You want to make sure that our internal customer service culture is just as important as our external customer service culture. Making sure that we are showing each other the same grace and customer service that we would our valued clients is really, really important. So with that being said, I want to kind of hit on some of the HR policy practice piece as well. The first slide was kind of the warm fuzzy, and now we get into kind of the hard and fast. Here's what we also need to do. So if I look back to, mid-March, when all of this first happened, there was a lot going on. There was, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act that came out, and that was a lot of information pushed incredibly quick for employers. And I'll be quite frank with you, I'm still getting questions on it. We still have calls and emails from clients that don't know anything about the FFCRA or know enough but are still confused about when do I get this paid leave? Does this qualify? Does that qualify? How do I get the tax credits? all of these things because the regulation was basically passed and signed into law within 4 days. And then it took a couple of weeks for the Department of Labor to come out and provide Q&A and sample policies and forms and those sorts of things. So what I will say with the FFCRA is make sure you have a policy in place. Remember, the FFCRA is a temporary enacted law. It went into effect April 1st, and it will end December 31st of this year, assuming that Congress doesn't need to expand it. Knock on wood, hopefully we don't have a second flare-up of COVID, but, who knows. So the FFCRA provides paid leave to individuals. If they have, a mandatory quarantine, if they're seeking medical diagnosis, if they need to take off for childcare issues, if they have been told to self-quarantine because they are at risk due to an underlying medical condition, or they've tested positive. So there are 6 reasons why somebody can take emergency paid sick leave, which is 10 days paid. But then they also expanded a family medical leave aspect. So I think a lot of confusion that has come up in particular is about the emergency or the expanded family medical leave for the child care piece. So if you're a smaller business and you have less than 50 employees, you probably don't know anything about Family Medical Leave Act because you wouldn't have to comply based on the size of your organization. So with the FFCRA, they basically said, well, all employers, regardless of size, are going to have to offer this up to 12 weeks paid leave if somebody needs to be off because of childcare issues, which has impacted a lot of companies. Because let's be honest, schools and daycares closed. If you were here in Virginia, our schools closed in March. If you're in North Carolina or another state, their schools didn't close as early as ours. So you've got a situation where you've never really had to comply with any sort of mandated paid leave by a state or federal government. And now we've got a situation where schools are closed. If you have school-aged kids, and maybe daycare is closed, and you've got employees that are left thinking, well, what am I going to do? My kids are at home. I can't come to work. So there are paid leaves up to 12 weeks for the child care piece. But more importantly, there are different calculations as to if you're taking the leave for reasons 1 through 3 because you're sick, you've been told to quarantine, or you're awaiting diagnosis, then you get 100% of your pay. But if you're taking it for childcare related reasons, then you only get 2/3 of your pay for the week. So it is a little confusing. It's a little complex. Not going to lie to you, the way that it was rolled out was a little overwhelming for a lot of folks. But what I will say is make sure that you've got your ducks in a row with the FFCRA. You've got a company policy in place. There also is an updated mandated poster that you need to have displayed with all of your other employment posters. And yes, I know if we're all working remotely, it makes it a little hard to put a poster up in an office building where nobody is at. But perhaps you've got an intranet or an internal HRIS system that you're utilizing, so you can upload it there. Make sure that you've got good FFCRA documentation. That's going to be vital if you're claiming the tax credit, but also to show that you have complied with the law. Common misconception is that employees have to request the leave. No. This falls back on management, just as it would if we were talking about normal FMLA. It's really, really important, and this kind of goes back to our communication piece, that your managers are staying in the know with their staff, but communicating that back to whoever's handling the HR piece. Because we have to have a request forms, we have to have documentation, we have to track the leave, know when it runs out, that sort of thing. And also you have to be able to support that if it's challenged by the Department of Labor. If somebody makes a complaint to the Department of Labor and says, well, you know what? Jamie Hasty at SESCO didn't give David McCaleb his 10 days paid leave, even though he just made me stay at home unpaid. That's not going to fly. So, you know, an employee can make a complaint with the Department of Labor, and you're going to have to defend that complaint and show that, no, in fact, we did comply with the families first, and here's what we did. Here's our policy, here's our procedure, and here's what they got. So documentation is really, really key. I didn't list the CARES Act, but that came the next week, a week or so after the FFCRA, and that there were a lot of questions sent to SESCO about, you know, the Paycheck Protection Program, and that sort of thing, the SBA loans. And so what we're seeing right now, and what a lot of questions are coming in right now, is related to companies that may have done layoffs or furloughs, and trying to recall those employees, especially if you got the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Loan, because you have to have certain headcounts back before your loan hits. I think if you got the loan early, then you need to have your headcounts back up by June 30th. If you got it a little bit later, you may have a different grace period. And if you don't have those same headcounts, then the reduced headcount number is going to play into your percentage of loan forgiveness. So, of course, nobody wants to have to pay back that loan to a certain degree. So we are seeing a lot of employers struggle with getting employees to return to work. And that struggle is for a number of reasons. Perhaps school's still out or daycare's still closed and they can't return, and they've exhausted all of their 12 weeks. Under the leave, but they still don't have the ability to work from home, and they can't return to work. So, you know, we've got to offer them the job back, and if they decline, then we consider it a voluntary resignation. But the other piece is more important. If you got the PPP and you are recalling employees that have either been off under the emergency sick leave, that were off on the expanded FMLA for childcare, whether they were furloughed temporarily, that needs to be documented, because you're going to have to support, you're going to have to turn in those things to support your PPP loan. That's part of the requirements of the loan, is that you have written documentation of job offers and declinations. The other piece to that I will say is, and I know it's a touchy subject and can be a grand debate, is that, you know, the CARES Act also implemented an additional federal supplement to unemployment. So if you have employees who've had a reduction in their hours of work, maybe they were working full-time, but we've taken them to part-time because business has dropped down, or we're staggering schedules, so we kept them employed but had to knock them down to part-time, they can draw unemployment for that. Perhaps they were temporarily furloughed or laid off 100%, and they went from 40 or 50 hours down to 0 hours. They can draw unemployment for that. And with the additional federal subsidy for the unemployment, for some employees, they're making more on unemployment than they would be working. It's the fact of the matter. I know that it is sometimes difficult to bring people back, and we're hearing that frustration come out in a lot of conversations with our valued clients and companies that are calling in with struggles related to recalls. So the other piece that I will say is, when you're documenting, these recalls or return to work, if the employee is declining that, check with your respective states. So here in Virginia, in a perfect world, the unemployment office is supposed to verify, have you offered them their job back, so on and so forth. But there's actually an online link that you can go and submit for the employee name, their social, their basic contact information, and that you have offered them a job and they have declined to return. because that can impact their ability to draw unemployment, but it also impacts your unemployment rates. That's a calculation that they do over the previous 3 years. So have good compliance with Families First. If you have questions about the CARES Act, we're happy to walk through those with you. But documentation is going to be crucial for both of those aspects. The other thing that you are going to want to challenge and look at would be your paid leave policy. So something that was very confusing for a lot of employers was when the Families First came out, it was a mandated 10-day sick leave or a paid up to 12 weeks leave. And a lot of companies were like, well, wait a minute, I already offer PTO or I offer vacation sick leave. Why can't I just use that? Because that Families First is a completely separate, standalone than any other fringe benefit that you may offer. You also have to remember that, at least for now, in Virginia and North Carolina and Tennessee and West Virginia, the state doesn't mandate that you provide paid leave in the form of vacation or sick leave or anything like that. So your paid leave policies are above and beyond what you really need to do. But what we are suggesting a lot of companies do is challenge those paid leave policies right now. Does it make sense based on the culture of your organization, based on the needs of your staff, based on the affordability of the organization? If you have a situation where employees start cashing out all of this accrued available leave, can we afford to pay it out? A lot of people, believe it or not, there is this big trend of companies going to unlimited PTO policies. And I think that works in some industries, and in other industries it does not work. But again, it goes back to your culture of, if employees are getting their work done, they're being productive, and they, are working either in the office or at home or wherever it may be, do they really need to be tracking 2 hours of paid leave if they want to leave early on a Friday to go down to the beach with their family? So again, the culture, the paid leave policies, all of these things are being challenged now. And I don't use challenge to be like a negative challenge. It's a good opportunity to take a step back and look at, what is the culture of our organization? Do these policies support that culture? And kind of what the organization needs to look like from a leave policy perspective for the next 6 months to a year. I think COVID has really forced us to take a step back and reevaluate how we work and how we provide time off to our staff. And perhaps we need to look at whether our policies are as flexible as we really need them to be. And the same thing with flexible work schedules. Again, it's gotta work for your company. Just because somebody else is doing it or somebody's saying, oh, you should check this out, it doesn't mean that it might work for your company. So we still have to get the work done. We still have to make sure that, our employees are engaged and our customers are taken care of, but flexible work schedules are going to be a major trend moving forward. It's going to be actually really difficult. I think David and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago when we look at physical office space, because many of us have been working from home for the last, 3-4 months. Companies are having a difficult time actually getting people to come back into the office because we've shown, or they've proven that, look, I can be productive at home. I can work from home just fine. Why do I need to physically be in the office? So companies are starting to look at, do we even need this physical office space? Or if we're doing flex schedules and we're rotating people in, maybe we don't need as big of a physical office space. So, those things are items that I suggest you kind of add to your to-do list and start that dialogue and think about what we need moving forward. I mentioned in the engagement piece about performance management, that is really crucial now. SMART goals, job descriptions, staying in touch, providing that ongoing constructive feedback. annual evaluations are still important. If you're not doing an annual evaluation, I strongly encourage you to do that. A lot of companies do quarterly, just informal touch points or 6 months evals. That's really important. The last piece that I kind of want to hit on before we go into any sort of Q&A is that I want to talk about general workforce development. So as we're recalling employees, as we are thinking about perhaps we have additional jobs that we need to fill because certain employees chose not to come back and we need to rehire. That workforce development and that screening and hiring and onboarding process is going to look incredibly different if we are not in the office. How do you onboard a brand new person and get them acclimated to your culture, to your environment, to their team or department if they're not physically there? And so you're gonna have to think outside the box. It's gonna have to be Zoom or Google Teams or Microsoft Teams, what have you. Maybe it's going to be more individual conversations or facilitating those individual touch points in the meets and actively working to engage them. Because here's the thing, folks, the first 6 months of a new hire is really make or break. If they don't connect, you can forget it. They will bide their time and then they will move on, not because you weren't a good company, not because you didn't treat them fairly, but it's about the connection. It's about the relationship. So the workforce development is going to be really, really important as screening and hiring, onboarding, and just retention piece. Also think about ways that we can continue to provide training and development for your staff. For folks that have stepped up, perhaps this is a good opportunity through their performance management or the eval to say, hey, you showed some really great leadership capabilities, or you took on this aspect that was nothing to do with your job, and, you know, hey, I really think that we can grow or give you additional job responsibilities and some additional training, and that allows you to have a different title or be promoted or what have you. So workforce development is really, really important. And it's not going to look like it always has. Online training, additional career pathing, career laddering is going to be something that you want to consider. So I know we've covered a lot in kind of 45 minutes. A lot of hopefully good information for you all, and certainly I'm happy to kind of dig in more individually if you have some additional follow-up questions that I'm looking at. I don't see any messages in the chat feature, but if you have questions, please use that chat feature and I can field those to you. But David, do you have any thoughts for some of your clients on?
Jamie, under the questions portion, there have been one comment that the elephant's awesome, and then
thanks.
There are two questions there. So
okay.
Instead of the chat, click on the questions.
And I apologize, I can't see those. So can you read them to me?
Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry. Okay, so one from Sarah Simoneau. If an employee has accrued PTO available to use and they need to stay at home to care for a child, do we bypass the PTO and pay them at the 66% rate, or use their PTO, which would pay them at 100% for the time off?
Yeah, that's a great question. So technically, you have to bypass the PTO and use the EFMLA, the 12 weeks. Now, let's hypothetically say they use the first 10 days paid leave under the emergency sick leave, and then the remaining 10 weeks would be paid at the 2/3. So they would have the full 12 weeks at the 2/3. DOL was very specific that we can't take their PTO in lieu of complying with the EFMLA for the child care. It's an awesome question. We get it a lot. I understand, because why wouldn't you want to give them 100%? But in theory, you could let them do the 12 weeks and then once they run out of the 12 weeks, if they still have to stay home and you're agreeable, then you could burn through their PTO after. But remember, the EFMLA and the emergency sick leave, when we talk about paying those things out, there is a caveat of the employee does not have the ability to work from home or to telecommute. So if I'm at home with my kids, which our school's closed in March, and I have the ability to work from home, was it distracting? Yes. Was it difficult to homeschool and work and do everything else going on every day? Yes. But my employer wouldn't have had to pay me the EFMLA because I had the ability to work from home and I was getting my work done. Now, was I getting all of it done? Yes. But that may not be the case for other employees. So, make sure that you're looking at the full picture of, if they need to stay home for the 12 weeks with the kids, great. Can they work from home? Then you may not have to do the EFMLA. So all very specific circumstances. And so our advice may vary slightly different based on the facts and circumstances of that particular situation. But great question from Sarah regarding the PTO and the EFMLA.
Okay, well, we've got a couple more. We've got one from Brian Wainwright. My company received a PPP loan, and while we were fortunate that we didn't need to reduce any employees' hours or lay off any employees, we had one voluntary resignation after receiving the loan. Does that resignation count against us in terms of forgiveness of the PPP loan?
Yeah, great question, Brian. In theory, it should not. Hopefully that person resigned in writing and showed that they voluntarily resigned. So you should be fine, but keep that documentation. Obviously, if you can replace that person and the headcounts level itself out, you should be fine. But if you are really concerned about it, I would suggest checking with your CPA because they'll be able to talk a little bit more about the IRS and the loan forgiveness and the tax piece of that.
Fantastic. So got two more, actually, one from both from Daryl Russell. The first one is, are there companies that are providing services to track employees' return to work, possibly through software such as daily temperature checks, symptoms, etc., testing services, ongoing health status verification, and engagement with employee? This would make sure the employees feel safe to return to work.
Yeah, Daryl, good question. He always asks me the hard questions. So a couple of things. As you all are returning to work, there's a lot of standards. There's the phase 2, the upcoming phase 3 standards, the social distancing, the required face masks here in Virginia. You're not required to take temperature testing, but some employers are. But with temperature testing comes some additional liability from HIPAA, from ADA, from FMLA, a number of medical pieces. And then there's required training if you're taking somebody's temperature, and then a policy and procedure that has to be put in place for what we're doing with the information. Are we recording it? If it's going in a log, where does that go? Because there are employees' confidential medical information there, so it has to be kept in a separate file under lock and key in a separate folder for confidentiality and HIPAA purposes. There are certain sanitation things that have to be put in place also through the respective phases in the return to work to negate any sort of liability of exposure, both from OSHA and the CDC guidelines. So there are, to answer Daryl's question, there are some companies out there that are managing your temperature checks and that sort of thing. I don't know that you need it. Again, I think that's based on your individual company's desire and what you feel is appropriate. I think as long as you're following the CDC recommendations, you're sanitizing, you're social distancing, you're doing your best to negate exposure. And again, industry-wise, some of that's going to vary based on the industry that you're in. Healthcare is going to have a higher exposure than more of a administrative office environment that is not interacting with customers as much. So follow the CDC guidelines. If you think you want to do temperature testing, reach out to me. Let's talk about it, because there are certain things that need to be put into place, protocols, training, so that we don't open ourselves up to liability. But yeah, some employees are afraid to come back to work. Absolutely. I get it. Nobody wants to get the COVID, but we've just got to do the best that we can and make sure that we're communicating all of the things that we have put into place to keep employees safe at work.
The second one, I think you may have already hit on. I'll go ahead and mention it just in case, though. How do companies develop plans to bring employees back to work and ensure that they are healthy?
Yeah, great question. So again, a lot of that's driven by the state and the phase that you're in, and also CDC guidelines, and OSHA standards. So something that we didn't mention, because it's not law yet, but if you are here in Virginia, heads up, the Virginia Department of Labor and Industry has issued proposed temporary regulations addressing COVID and workplace safety standards. And that includes mandating a 6-foot social distance between employees, mandating face masks in the office, in the auto shop, in your trucking company, everywhere within the workplace. Mandating some other provisions. Again, these are proposed regulations. Upon reviewing the 36 pages, quite frankly, most of them follow pretty much phase 2 and phase 3 guidelines anyways, and what the CDC is saying. I think employers get a little bit nervous, and rightfully so, because it's regulation. And then the DOL would have the ability to come in and, slap you on the wrist or fine you if we weren't complying with these things. So that it's an open comment period right now. It has not been passed. When it does, obviously SESCO will blast it out. But there's a lot of things that you can do. So I want to share my screen again here for a second if I can.
You're just FYI, it is being shared.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so let me do this. Let me take you, I want to take you to the SESCO COVID page. So if you go to the SESCOMGT.com website, this is our company, this is SESCO's website, but up here on the top banner is the COVID-19 resource page. And honestly, it is a wealth of information. So it breaks it down into really each category. So we've got how to reopen your business without the liability, section 1 and 2. Then we have I think it's a 40-page document, but it's COVID-19 frequently asked questions by employers that you can click here and look at. It's got overviews of the families first, all of the required notices and templates for the FFCRA, including the sick leave policy, the request for leave, the forms, the poster. If you have to have a doctor's note to clear them to return to work, here's the medical examiner's form. It's got information on the CARES Act, the small business loans, and then there are a ton of general COVID-19 just resources, memos, communications, all of that is there for you at SESCO MGT and under the COVID-19 resource tab. So hopefully that's a nice resource for you all. And it's free. Go on there, take it, use it. If you have questions, we're happy to go through that with you as well.
All right, well, I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
And thank you. This has been really, really great. I truly appreciate it.
Absolutely. And something I did want to talk before we briefly go, because I know we're right at time. If you're a current banker's client and you've worked with SESCO in the past, or you have access to SESCO, to call us, to email us for questions, that's awesome. If you're a banker's client and you have never heard about SESCO or know that you may have the potential ability to contact SESCO for HR related questions, reach out to your respective broker. ask them about the SESCO and bankers relationship. We do have a partnership available. If you have the benefits with bankers that you have some basic access to SESCO through telephone and email consulting. So reach out to your broker, talk to them about that. They can reach out to us and we can kind of get that ball rolling so that you can work with SESCO.
Well, thank you. And again, a link to the recorded session will be sent to everyone. And hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much, Jamie.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.